Thank you, Bruce. Offering to do this is a wonderful opportunity to actually get to know the candidates. One of the problems with the process is that you rarely get to know who the candidates really are, and you get these little snippets of time, and you get to say this or that. But with you, this is a great opportunity, so I really, really do appreciate it.
Thank you.
And also, Mr. Guy Harvey is here today, and he's a good friend of mine, and he's actually really good at what he does. It's kind of like Johnny Carson. He plays an excellent role as an MC, and I believe it's his dharma. So, Mr. Harvey, what kind of questions do you have for me today?
Thanks, Ed. My first question for you is, why do you think you are a suitable fit to be mayor of the city of Fairfield?
Well, a lot of people don't know that I come from a very rural background. My family homesteaded in Nebraska and were farmers for generations. My great-great-grandfather was the first man in the state of Nebraska to grow a 100 bushel acre of corn, hand-picked with horses. It's part of our legacy. And that legacy continued all the way through my grandfather's death, who lived across the garden from us. My dad was a factory worker his whole life, in addition to everything else he did. And he taught us kids how to work, and we would work out in the gardens and work on the houses, and it seemed like that's all we really did was work. That's pretty much his legacy. But, I feel like I'm a very good fit for this job simply because of my background. I've worked in factories. I used to be a trim carpenter. I used to paint houses, farming background, etc. And then, of course, I had the epiphany that I wanted to become a lawyer, and so I did so. And then I got very excited and about the opportunity to move to Fairfield and became part of the meditating community, which I'm very much a part of. So I feel like I represent the entire community. In fact, I've made a career in law of representing the common man. And so I'm not one of the insiders. I'm a common man, and I think that I have something to offer to the community.
Tell us about yourself and how you got involved in politics. I know you have a very keen interest in politics, and you have deep concerns about the state of politics today, and that you've thought about it very, very deeply. So I'd like to hear more about that.
It's kind of been a lifelong passion. I started when I was in high school. The first book I ever read was in ninth grade, 1984, by George Orwell. And I think that was in 1969 or something. And I remember reading that and thinking, well, this is insane. This can't be the America that I believe in and love. And I just made a personal vow that if I ever saw any of this kind of thing going on, where the rights of the people were taken away in this severe way, that I would, quote, do something about it. And as a result, that was really the first commitment I ever made in my entire life. And as a result of that commitment, I started watching and learning, because I realized that unless I had an understanding of how the world operated at a deep level, that I would not be able to actually do anything about it. So I started a very intense study of politics, and I watched it very carefully. Of course, I became a lawyer, and eventually I became very interested in the founding of our nation, and I studied that intensely for about 10 to 15 years. There was a program called An Evening a Month for America that was a guided study tour through the Constitutional Study Group. Cleon Skousen put that together, and it was very, very beautiful. And it went in and studied what the founders studied and the history that they studied and what they were trying to create. And the founding of this nation was a very historical moment. There had never been anything like that had ever occurred on this planet before. And it was really a miracle that happened. We know we've heard of all the fabled stories of Valley Forge and George Washington having his vision of an angel coming to him and talking about the future of America. And in particular, I studied the words of Thomas Jefferson and how he arrived at his concept of inalienable rights. Now, prior to that time, and it's really a big part of my campaign is why I'm going into this, prior to that time, the rights that were eventually enshrined in the Bill of Rights were not commonly understood to be rights. And what Jefferson did was, which was unique, he studied all of the ancient systems of government, even to the point of learning Greek, the Greek language, so he could really understand what their systems was like. He studied the Anglo-Saxons, he studied the Mosaic Law, which was actually a very big part of the Constitution. The representative form of government came from the Mosaic Law, also known as the Law of the Covenant. And in particular, Jefferson studied the words of Jesus. And he didn't belong to any particular church, but he loved the teachings of Jesus Christ. So what he did was, and I have the book here, he went into the New Testament and he cut out the only words he cut out were the words that actually Jesus spoke. It's called the Jefferson Bible. So he did an intense study of the writings and the speaking of Jesus and all the concepts of that all men are sons of God, that he wasn't, we were all sons of God. He said he was the Son of Man, and that we're all sons of gods, and we all have the rights that he had, and that we were given these divine rights. Out of that understanding, his epiphany arose that of this concept of inalienable rights, that the rights of the people come from God. They do not come from the government at any level. And the reason why that's important, right now, the biggest issue politically in the world that is happening is where do the rights come from? Where do rights come from? That's the issue, whether people know it or not. And out of that, we have what's called the community rights movement, which I'm a part of. I actually spoke publicly when Paul Cienfuegos came to the Phoenix Rising Hall. I did a talk about the effects of his concepts of community rights. One example is the whole 5G thing and all the things that are attempting to be imposed upon us. The real issue is, do we as a community have the constitutional, legal, and moral right to create a form of government on every level of our lives that we choose that's not imposed upon us? And I know that we do. I'm actually writing a book called Inalienable that describes this. If we accept these rights, if we understand what these rights are, that gives us not only the right to create the government that we want for our community, in my belief, we have the duty. So it's not just a right, but a duty. And if we accept that right and we accept the duty, that includes taking responsibility. You can't say that you're accepting responsibility if you don't do something about it. The beauty of accepting responsibility, it gives us freedom. It gives us the ability to be free. And this is the reason why I chose the phrase embrace freedom. If you embrace freedom, you have to do all the things that come before that to get to that state of freedom. But if we as a community embrace freedom, we can create whatever we want. And that is an amazing realization that we have the right to create whatever we want. And that's what I hope to do as mayor.
There's some very interesting ideas there, Ed, and a lot to reflect on. And at the same time, I think people would be interested to know, what have you done practically to implement some of these ideas that you've been inspired by?
Well, I've been inspired, as you say, for a long time on this thing. I've had these epiphanies for some time. There's a little-known quote of Thomas Jefferson. He said that he had entered into a state of consciousness where he realized the source of these rights. And he said, and you can do it too. So when I read that, I go, are you kidding me? So I just said internally, I said, okay, I want to recognize these rights. I want to understand this state where you can understand the source of rights. And immediately I started having these cognitions. The first one was with the issue of freedom of speech as an example. There's a whole big issue whether corporations, and the U.S. and the Supreme Court actually ruled wrongly on this point, And it's really easy to understand why they ruled wrongly. Because all of the Bill of Rights only were for humans. Humans. So that meant freedom of speech was only the right of a human. And the problem with corporations claiming free speech rights is they don't have a moral background, they don't have a soul. They're driven pretty much just by profit. And yet if they're given free speech rights, they effectively drown out all of the humans. It's kind of like a matrix thing, where the corporations control it and the humans are merely slaves. And that's really kind of where we're at right now. But once we wake up and realize that we as humans are the only ones that have these rights, we can say no. We can say no and make our own choices. So one of the things I did was, I remember back in about 1990 when cable access television came out, I had this epiphany that I was going to create one of the first cable access TV shows. And I did so, and it was called Community Empowerment, Rediscovering Our Unlimited Resources. And in that show, I interviewed people and talked about what we could create as a community if we recognized that we were empowered. Mm-hmm. Even interviewed my father once and talked about how much vegetables and fruits that he was able to grow on just a few acres, and how if we translated that as a community, we could have this extreme abundance of food to eat like that. So I did that. I eventually ended up running for Attorney General of Iowa because I was inspired to do so when Clive Cleveland ran for governor. And as part of that campaign, we wrote a book together called Restoring the Heart of America, a return to government by the people, again, based on the same concepts. And in that book, I wrote 3 chapters. One was called Restoring the Integrity of the Political Process. And that included the realization of these rights. And it's interesting because Warren Buffett had made a statement that he realized, of course, one of the richest men in the world, right? And owns all these corporations and everything. He had the same realization that I had. And he said the simple way to solve the whole problem of control of politics is to disallow any contribution to the political process from anyone who is not a human. Only humans can contribute to the political process. He said the problem today is, because those contributions are allowed, if a company doesn't contribute to the politicians, they're at a competitive disadvantage. So the system is now geared to actually for them to pay the politicians to vote on their behalf. And with just that one simple correction, that's the Citizens United decision, that one simple correction, and there's a constitutional amendment that we could relatively easily enact that would solve this problem overnight. And we would solve, in my opinion, 90% of the political problems in this country. So these have real world implications. And that's one of the reasons why I'm running for governor. Obviously I've helped people.
Mayor.
Governor. Yeah, okay, I'm running for governor next. Sorry about that. I was involved in a mentorship program at the Lincoln School. It was one of the best experiences of my life. I founded what's called the Men and Boys Canoe Trip, annual canoe trip, because I recognized that there was a lot of fatherless young men in this town. And I intuitively knew that they were missing that kind of male camaraderie and support. And so we started that. We did it for 11 years. We built it up to 85 men and boys. And it used to be the funnest thing I did the entire year. And I have young boys that are now men in their 40s that come up to me and thank me for doing that. So, when I see these things, I take advantage of it. I try to do something about it, and I've learned that it can be done. So these are just some of the things that I've done.
When you become mayor of Fairfield, what vision will you be unfolding for Fairfield?
It kind of goes back to my overall perspective of freedom, of embracing freedom. People, unless you're kind of watching the evolution of society, you don't see what's actually going on. So we live in an information age, which means that anybody can have access to the highest level of information anywhere on this planet. And education, to me, is critically important. Our education system is so bad in America that 37% of the high school kids can barely read. 17% can perform remedial math. This is ridiculous. We spend untold amounts of money and the kids don't even learn the basic things. They don't learn any accounting. They don't know how to work, by the way. Nobody's ever taught them how to work. They don't know how to have a good credit report. They don't know the importance of how to manage their finances. They don't know anything about entrepreneurship. And all of this is a byproduct of an improper delegation of power. That's really what it is. In the 9th and 10th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, it says that unless a power was granted to the federal government, it doesn't exist in the federal government, and all the powers not delegated are reserved to the states or to the people. And what's interesting, and first of all, education was never delegated. There is no constitutional authority whatsoever for the federal government to be involved in education. People assume, wrongly, that paying their taxes and supporting the Department of Education is actually helping their child. Before the Department of Education was involved in the education of our children, we had the highest level of education in the world, in America. After 40, 50, 60 years, we're at almost the very bottom of all industrialized nations. It's a tragedy. And it's the natural result of that delegation of power. It happens automatically. Because if you think about it, if you're going to give $80 billion a year to the Department of Education, and they're supposed to, quote, do something about education, what are they going to do? They did exactly what they could do. They created the Common Core curriculum. The purpose of the Common Core curriculum is not for us. It's for them. Because if you can dumb down the education so that everybody passes, then it looks like they've done something. That's why the quality of education has gone down. It's actually has to do with the ego of the government. The ego of the government. So we take that away and we take responsibility. Then what we do is, and this is critically important, the fundamental precept of education is that all the kids are the same. It's a scientific fact that there's no two snowflakes in the history of creation that are ever the same. Do you know how many snowflakes there's been in the history of creation? If every snowflake in the history of creation is unique, I promise you every human being that's ever born is entirely unique. So what we must do then is we must, first of all, recognize that every child is entirely unique, which means we then want to craft an education system to bring out the very best of that child, the uniqueness of that child, the superhero that is within everyone. And it's the reason why I have Captain America sitting here on my motorcycle, because we all have a superhero inside of ourselves. And what we want to do as a community is we want to bring out the superhero in everyone. That's what we want to do. And so we can do that by changing the direction of our educational system. Now, what people don't understand is, and this is where mayor comes in and everything else comes in, and all of the people in the town come in, another key question of education is, who are the teachers? It's a big mistake. All the teachers that work, they're wonderful people. They do their very best under the circumstances that they're given. But to expect them to teach these kids everything they need to know and to embellish their uniqueness is a mistake. And that's where we all come in. So what I intend to do is to create mentorship programs where everyone in the community can be a mentor. What the children need to do is they need to be exposed to the variety of wonderful people that are in this community. And one of the greatest tragedies that we have, and we see it all the time, our good friends pass away. Some of the best men and women that you've ever even known pass away. They're gone. Their skills, their knowledge, their love could have been given to these young people. It could have been given to them in a very concrete way. But we don't do that because we have the perspective wrong. So mentorship is something that is very real to me. and it's something that we can do. And I'll just go one step further because it's an important point. We have to bring the generations back together again. So what's happened is one of the greatest tragedies is when a person retires and they get older and they're no longer working again, and they, maybe their friends pass away, and they start feeling like they don't really have a purpose. But yet their whole life they've learned things of value. They have good hearts, and they have much that they could give to other people and would want to give to other people if they were given a context in which to do so. At the same time, what do we have? We have young people begging for love and attention, begging for support to bring out their uniqueness. So really, all you got to do, it's not even that hard to do. You just got to create a context where these generations come back together again. And so this is kind of when I talk about community empowerment, rediscovering our unlimited resources, these resources are already there, but we don't have a system that brings that out. So that's what I'm talking about. Part of what I'm talking about.
I often hear from friends in Fairfield about their concerns about a variety of environmental issues. You mentioned 5G. What's your vision for Fairfield in this regards? And I think it also relates to what you were talking about earlier about inalienable rights. Because some of these issues are related to corporate influence. So we mentioned 5G, smart meters and Alliant. There's a lot of concerns about CAFO.
Yeah, well, let's start with the smart meter issue. I've studied the history of Alliant Energy's involvement in our community. I was here before Interstate Light and Power bought out Iowa Southern Utilities. At that time, that was back in the 80s, at that time we had the lowest electricity rates in the state. And they said, well, and we agreed to allow them to buy that system. Then they came in and they said, well, we won't raise the rates for 5 years as long as you guys allow us to buy and take over the monopoly of providing electricity to our community. And so that's what happened. At the end of that 5 years, the rates started going up, and they've gone up dramatically. At the same, we're talking 14% increases being requested virtually every single time. And I promise you, the Iowa Utilities Board has already been handled from their side. So basically, the way it works, and I've seen it 10 to 20 times, they make a request for 14 to 15%, saying they need to improve the infrastructure. It's always about the infrastructure. Then the utility board, then people scream, oh, we can't afford it. And then the utility board comes in and says, all right, we'll agree to 7 or 8%. And this is how it goes every time. So they acted like they were on our side with the whole green energy thing. They've given up a lot of the programs now to help people create energy efficiencies. A lot of those programs don't all exist anymore. In the beginning, the whole net metering thing with solar panels, that was such a big deal for so many people, and it was a huge, and still is a huge industry in this community. They've shut that down. Now they've effectively created a situation where, well, we're going to let you do it, but you're only going to create about a third of the electricity at the net rate, and after that, it's what's called the avoided cost. So they're basically buying from you any electricity that you produce at very tiny rates, usually around 1.5 to 2 cents a kilowatt, and you're producing it for them, and then it's going on the grid and they're getting it back. So we have a unique opportunity in Fairfield. No community in Fairfield has escaped from Alliant or even Mid-America, is my understanding, for, I believe, 23 years. Decorah, Iowa attempted it, I believe it was either last year or the year before. They had a beautiful plan. I've studied their plan. I haven't talked directly with the people, but I have people that are talking to them about what happened. It's my understanding the city had it all laid out. They were going to create some form of energy cooperative. And they talked about hundreds of millions of dollars that were going to be able to stay in the community if they took back this and produced their own electricity, owned it themselves, managed it, the system themselves. My understanding is they spent about $100,000 and to promote it, and in the final month, Alliant Energy spent $5 million of advertising to convince the people of Decorah to vote against this, to scare them. The Decorah lost the vote by 3 votes. They should have won that. We can obviously solve the smart meter problem if we take over the utility. Fairfield has this amazing opportunity to, with the technology that we already have in this community, one of the 2 largest solar companies in the state, the environmental programs at the university. We can do this. And one of the things that people don't understand is there's new technologies out there. There's technologies to mine the sanitary landfills for methane and burn it with no residue. There's companies that actually, I was studying this because I like to study the blockchain because it's the greatest productivity technology in the last 100 years. They actually create cryptocurrency. They buy these huge sanitary landfills. They burn the electricity in a way that there's 0 residue, and then they create a cryptocurrency, and people can invest in this. So these technologies exist. So we can do this. We can do this. Ask me a question about 5G, Mr. Hardy. Please ask me a question.
Well, 5G is a new level of wireless communication, and a lot of people have concerns about it. People reported having negative health impacts from where 5G has been used, and it's something that it's very hard for communities to resist. I imagine I think billions would probably be too small to put a price on how big of an industry it is, so much bigger than billions. So, I mean, what can a community like Fairfield do with an issue like 5G? And
well,
if we as a community decide that we prefer not to have 5G, what power do we have?
Well, we definitely have the power, and it's already been done. There's entire communities and countries that have outlawed 5G. So trust me, it can be done. Now, yes, the technology itself has amazing capabilities. I'm not discounting that. But you know what the good news is? There's a way to do it where it's not wireless. It's called SafeG. So, but it's more expensive for them because they got to actually put it in wires. They can't just put, these emitting things all over the place. And really, the simplest thing that we can do as a community, and it's done all the time, and there's no good reason why we can't do it, we can't just offer a resolution at the city council where we as a community are going to decide that we're not going to allow 5G until we've had time to study the issue. It's real simple. And then the city council can vote and we can make that decision. It's part of the affirmative rights that Paul Cienfuegos talks about in his community rights movement. So what we can do this. We have the right to do it. And ultimately it's going to come down to a constitutional issue, which again is the most important issue on this planet. And that is, where do rights come from? If we get this right, if we understand it, and humanity awakens to this concept of inalienable rights, which are much bigger than what's contained in the Bill of Rights. There's a full panoply of rights, including the right, for example, to choose any substance on earth, a God-given substance, as medicine. Are you kidding me? They can tell us that we can't use an indigenous plant for medicine that's been used for thousands of years in every culture on earth, and they can tell us, they think they have the right to tell us, that we, the humans, can't pick that plant and make a medicine out of it. It was only because of our ignorance that those laws got passed. This is how important the understanding of these issues are. But once we recognize those issues, that we are already free. If you look at that door on my window in my office coming in, freedom is within. I was trying to make a statement. It is within. It's within all of us. The real issue is, are we going to collectively embrace that reality as a community? Or are we going to be just like everybody else, victims of whoever wants to impose anything upon us? That's going to be the question. Mr. Harvey, please.
Fairfield is a small rural town, and small rural towns face a number of challenges, primarily an economic challenge. Rural towns also have difficulty keeping young people, and that also kind of affects the economy. What's your vision for Fairfield in terms of, one, retaining youth or attracting youth to come here, and economic growth?
Yeah, it's kind of one of my what's the point? Complaints really is that I've seen where the city government has actually got in the way of actual complementary technologies that have evolved, and they've got in the way of allowing those kind of things to happen with us in the community. I mean, currently, it's against the law to create tiny home developments. It's against the law to have a bedroom in the back of a commercial space, even though it's in a district of town that no one's been able to figure out what to do, and this beautiful artist studio was created. It's against the law, so all of a sudden the value of that property just got diminished. The potential development for that entire area of town was right there in front of it. It could have been done. What is going to happen naturally? City got in the way. Lack of vision. When the city decided they were going to pass a law against allowing Airbnb, for example, throughout the town, that was a huge mistake. Huge mistake. So, and then they said, well, we can easily do a variance. Well, the first person that came for a variance, they denied it. They said, if we gave it to you, no one could have, we'd have to grant it for other people. And this was someone that lives at Walton Lake, actually my neighbor, who had already been granted permission for the city to build an apartment there. City inspector came out, approved it as an apartment. Then she started doing Airbnb, which was available. Then the city passed the law saying you can't do Airbnb in an R1 zone. Then she went and asked for the variance and said no. She spent like $100,000 trying to create this opportunity for herself. And that is a real opportunity. She could probably get $85 a night on a good weekend for that unit. It's a beautiful unit, by the way. It's a half a block from the Walton Golf Club with a beautiful lake in front of her. Those are pretty rare. So they have to see, and I see it as a generational thing as well. And that's part of the problem. So you've got the old boy network, old girl network. They're kind of seeing it, protecting their space. And then you've got the young generations coming along. We want to do this. We want to do this. Let's do this. Let us do this. And then they kind of get in the way. So that's a problem. So those can be corrected relatively easily. One of the greatest opportunities that exists financially anywhere is the blockchain. Let me give you an example of the power of the blockchain. Before Walmart adopted the blockchain to do their inventory, it took them 7 days to do their inventory. Now with the blockchain adopted, it takes 3.7 seconds. The level of productivity increase is incomprehensible. And what it does is it creates what's called self-governing models based on consensus. That's what's so amazing about it. These people that are creating these white papers, Satoshi Nakamoto and all these people, these are some of the most unbelievably intelligent human beings. They're a whole nother caliber of human being. And what they're doing is they're creating the possibility for governing models based upon consensus. Consensus means 100% agreement. We have a governmental model based on democracy, which the founders called mobocracy, because 51% could tell the 49% what to do, take their property, whatever. So they consider it to be one of the worst forms of government. The term itself has been co-opted to supposedly mean free speech, which we don't even have. But the blockchain would allow people to create an entire new healthcare system, which I'm actually working on, a new educational system. There's a form of what's called decentralized financing, where you could literally invest, let's say you had $1,000 to invest. You could invest $1 in 1,000 different ventures throughout the world to support people at the smallest level of investments and get a guaranteed return based upon the success of the venture, all based upon the way the blockchain is called a trustless environment. So what it does is it creates, the reason why it's so powerful is, let's say that you're trying to get to step 4. Well, step 4 can't happen until step 3 happens. Step 3 can't happen until step 2 happens. Step 2 can't happen until step 1 happens. So what that does is it takes out the intermediaries and it makes the natural progression of the enterprise happen automatically via what's called smart contracts. So I had a conversation with Josh Larrabee last year, and we were talking about the computer science program at the university. And he was saying, he was glowing about it. He said, I think the computer science program at MUM is excellent. But the problem is these people come in and they learn this programming, and they get offered a job in San Francisco. They don't really want to leave Fairfield. They get a job in San Francisco making $85K or whatever, and then they're paying $3,500 a month to live there. But they get a job, and they move out of town. And he said many of them would like to stay here. So all we got to do, and it's not even hard to do, and I'm doing it, creating a blockchain educational program. So, and they're already being offered. All I'm doing is just putting it on the television, putting it on the monitor, so that people can learn the blockchain. Blockchain coding is actually relatively easy to learn. They say you can learn, if you have basic coding skills, you can learn it in 30 days, believe it or not. And the demand for the blockchain developers is skyrocketing. And there's companies that will pay you starting at $75 an hour to do blockchain development. So it's an amazing opportunity, and it would enable people, anybody really that's interested in this kind of thing, even a young person. Some of these young people can do it automatically. They're just super geniuses. They don't even need to go to college. They don't need to do anything. They're just intuitive. They just boo, 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 and they're going to be wealthy the rest of their lives because of what they can create. So what we can do is we can use our freedom to create, via the blockchain, self-governing models based on consensus with world-class technologies associated with it. So that's kind of the vision of what I see we are able to do.
You mentioned Airbnb, and that's connected to tourism.
Yes.
And various community leaders have had visions for tourism and for Fairfield, and some really great things have been implemented in Fairfield, like the Art Walk, for example. What ideas do you have about expanding Fairfield as a tourist destination?
Well, I think we start with what we know we already have. We already have one of the best alternative medical care systems anywhere in the country, right here in Fairfield, with the Ayurvedic programs. We also have a full panoply of individuals that are students of alternative healing. In truth, people want to be healed. The medical care system is a tragedy, once again. It's not about healing. It's about taking your money. And it's not about fixing you. It's about giving you drugs, doing surgeries, and all of that. Those are facts. I could go into it. What people really want to do is be healed. So we can create a system where people come to Fairfield to be healed. I'm already actually working on this. The university is adopting a new Ayurvedic program, and that's brilliant. The price needs to come down. As a lawyer, I've done a lot of bankruptcy work. Medical bills are one of the chief causes of bankruptcy in this country. And I've had people come in and they had 5 members of their family die from cancer. I get this all the time. These poor people, they're eating the wrong foods. They're being told what to take for medicine. They go to the hospital. They contract MRSA infections at the hospital. I hate to tell you, but the hospital is one of the most dangerous places to go to. People know that, but nobody wants to admit it. So I'm not taking anything away from the life-saving technologies and what can be done, but people want to be healed. And one of the things that we kind of take for granted in Fairfield, in the evening, before the sun goes down, it's perfectly silent. There's this pervading peace that is unbelievable. And when we have gatherings downtown, the little children can play freely. Do you realize what a luxury that is? In so many parts of this country, you would never let your children run around in public. So what we already have is already so blessed. And we have the organic food movement. We have the amazing knowledge at the university level. We already have so much, and really all we really need to do is toot our horn. People will come. I promise you they will come. And then what we do is that we embellish what we already have. So they will come, and they will fall in love, especially if they're allowed to live in the home of someone in the community. That's where the Airbnb comes in. Because when people travel, what do? They get a hotel room. They don't know anybody in town. They kind of drive around. Maybe they go to a restaurant. They feel like an outsider. If they were able to stay in someone's home, especially if that person had connections within town, knew of interesting things that they could do and say. By the way, that's one of the biggest trends on Airbnb is basically becoming a touring guide. So not only do you get paid for them to stay in your home, but then you can lead them on these mini tours and you get paid extra for that. So then what happens is if they're allowed to do that, they're going to fall in love with our community. What we have is very special. And especially if we expand our eco-housing thing, which we can do, that would be another huge thing that we can do in this community. We're going to have, people are going to come, trust me on this point. Trust me, they will come. And they will bring their lives here, they'll bring their children's here, they'll bring their skills here, they'll bring their love here. Our community will grow and opportunity will expand for everyone. It'll just happen automatically.
One of the biggest concerns that I always hear on the city level is from property owners is property taxes. And everybody that owns property probably wants to pay as little as possible.
Yeah.
At the same time, I understand that they go towards some valuable things. So what's your view on this?
One of the things that bothers me, and I think sure bothers a lot of people, is they buy a property or whatever and they put their heart and soul into it. They make it beautiful. Next thing you know, their taxes are going way the heck up. So they're effectively punished for actually having done that. That happened to me with this building. I bought it was literally the worst property on the square when I bought it in 1986, May of 1986. There was water crashing in. It was an old bakery that was attempting to continue to run, and the whole upstairs was just walls falling down, and the front of the building was desperately in need of paint and cleaning and all that. And so I went to work, and I remember I was up on the scaffolding at the very top. There's a Stever sign at the very top. And I'm scraping it away, and I'm painting the little signs, the little names up there, and kind of risking my life and limb up there because, it's kind of a little bit treacherous. So, and I was proud of myself, actually. I was proud of myself for making it beautiful. This building was the first Victorian paint scheme in the downtown. And that summer, after I painted it, literally the next 4 worst properties in town responded also with Victorian schemes. So I found that interesting. As long as something was worse than them, they didn't have to do anything. But once I completed this one, then they wanted to improve. And then all of a sudden we've got five buildings now that have been improved. So, but then of course the taxes went through. I didn't really understand. I was naive about property taxes, and then taxes basically have gone up like 6, 7, 8 times over what they were before. I can't tell you how much money I pay in property taxes on all the properties.
You mean by a factor of 6 or 7?
Yes, 6 to 7 times more. Yeah.
Multiplied.
Yes, absolutely. So I'm actually in favor of what's called the TIF programs, the tax increment financing, because oftentimes projects may not take place otherwise. So let's say you're going to build something, you're going to do this, and you're seeking some economic advantage to do this. It's going to be for the betterment of the community. So they have this what's called tax increment financing. And I don't necessarily oppose that, because I believe that, again, something is being created that may not be created otherwise. There's also what's called tax abatements, and tax abatements are where the city agrees that if you do something, they won't increase the taxes for a certain number of years. What I don't see is I don't see that getting applied to the average citizen. So I would, and this is actually being done in communities throughout America. I think it's Santa Fe has a law that says if you buy a property, say, for $100,000 and you fix it up, your tax base upon which you're taxed stays at the level at which you purchased the property. So the rate might go up, but not the amount of the value of the property doesn't go up. And so what happens is if a property ever sells, then let's say it sells for $300,000, the new buyer is actually recognizing that he's going to pay at the rate of $300,000, but once again will not be punished for improving the property. And this is what I saw at the New Chicago thing, where the homeowner or the person that bought this property did not want to fix up the front of her property because she knew if she did, the city was immediately going to dramatically increase the property taxes. So I think that's the kind of thing that can be done for everyone. There's no reason not, because we're talking about improvements that may not take place otherwise. I just think. And then the real key to property taxes is increasing the tax base, which means having more people that own property. So as we create these eco-developments and we bring these new businesses to town, and there's more wealth that comes into town from the tourism angles and all of this, then everyone can be an owner, and that will increase the property tax base, which will reduce the amount of taxes per dollar of the tax base. I also truly believe there's efficiencies that could take place. I'm not going to go into it, but it's always touchy. Any form of government, once they get established, they never let go. That's a fact. On any level of government. So because they're getting money, and there's jobs, and there's authority, and there's power, and all of that. So that's a natural phenomenon. But as we create new ways of doing things, we can easily reduce the taxes because it won't cost as much. It just won't cost as much. So, and that's actually what's happening with the adoption of these major productivity increases, including the blockchain. So it's something that we can address. No question about it. We can do it.
I'm going to backtrack here a second, Ed. Maybe we covered this a little bit earlier about the city sometimes maybe overreaching when citizens are coming up with solutions, and you mentioned the situation in New Chicago with the artists. What about the Dahlias? What did you learn about the Dahlias?
Oh, okay, that was an interesting thing. I was involved in
well, what did you learn about that?
First of all, what was it?
Yeah, it was the Dahlia project. I always forget that gentleman's name.
Alex Gaddis.
Alexander Gaddis. And so what happened was, a prominent citizen in this town, I was at the Sun and the Roosevelt, and he was bragging about his dahlias. And he lives out in Vedic City, and he says, "Oh, it was Marishi's favorite flower." He's bragging about it. And then I thought, "Oh, that's interesting." Within a week, I get approached by Alexander Gaddis, who got inspired to plant dahlias all over town, and asked me if he could plant them in a right-of-way of a property that I have on 5th and West Broadway. It's a very long strip, big, super wide right-of-way. And I said, yeah, I heard dahlias are great. So he came in there and he worked. He dug it all up. He got all the bulbs. Very devoted to this project. Magnificent flowers, just some of the most beautiful flowers. Of course, butterflies come, and it was a major improvement to the beauty of that area. And then what happened was, by the time later on in the year, all of a sudden the city comes around and says, well, you got to cut those dahlias down. You got to cut those flowers down. Because there was some rule that you can't have only so much height within a right-of-way, even though it was being done all over town, which we could see it was being done all over town in other areas, for the main reason that you can't block the visual of going around corners. Well, this was not blocking anything. It was absolutely not blocking anything. It was at least 50 feet from the corners. Might have been more than that. And yet he became very disillusioned and actually wrote letters to the editor, and he tried to do fundraising. I think he went to the city council. They denied him. They denied him the ability to do this, and then he just kind of gave up. But the thing of it is, there's an article that will be in the Weekly Reader tomorrow. Pella became famous as the city of tulips, and people come from all over to see those tulips. And Pella is a major tourist attraction. I believe their whole economy came out of that. So a simple idea, one inspiration of one man, wanting to be his own form of his own superhero, we should encourage those things. So that's just one example. I also wrote about this concept of the City of Angels, because I used to drive by, I still do, America's Diamond. I see the big, beautiful angels, and I go, oh, that's so beautiful, And then I saw that he was posting some around across the street. He had one once, and then I started seeing angels, and I saw them at the Sondheim, the old Barrett Chapel angels. Those are magnificent. And then I had a vision of one up above the Bunnell building. There's a corner there with a big platform. And I had a vision of a beautiful angel looking down over the square and blessing the community. And I started talking to people about it, including former art leaders of the Art Walk and people like that, and everybody just loves the idea. So I thought, well, if we did this, it's just an idea. It's just another idea. And maybe we have an art contest and people create beautiful angel statues and they get permission from landowners, and maybe the city allows us to put them up somewhere here and there. We could be known as the City of Angels. And that would be a very interesting thing for people to come to. First of all, I believe in angels. I actually believe in them. You know what I'm saying? I invoke them. And I believe that they can bless us. And so people would come to Fairfield to see the angels. And then they would feel the spirit of the community and the peace that is here. Then they'd find out that you can get healed here. Then they'd come and get healed. Then they'd find out that there's this amazing knowledge here and environmental opportunities, and that we have these programs to keep the community safe. I'm telling you, they will come, they will fall in love, and they will want to move their lives here. And it'll all happen naturally.
Thank you, Ed. Would you like to make some final comments? Anything that you'd like to fill in that you haven't covered yet?
I would just say, it's not just Fairfield that's on the cusp of a new age. It's the entire world. And the technologies to do so many amazing things exist. But there's political structures that are in the way. We've already discussed that. So that's a huge thing that we have to address. And I understand these issues. We can deal with these issues. We can deal with political freedom. So if we deal with political freedom and we recognize and embrace freedom, then it's just a question of, well, what do we want to do? What do we want to create? Can we create the best education system in the world? Yes, we can. That's actually not that hard to do. Try to believe me or not, because it's all about access. If we provide the access, then we can have the best education system in the world. We can have the best healthcare system in the world. We can actually reform criminal justice. it's already being done, but it's not being done coherently in any one community. So Fairfield can be that community that is the lighthouse, can be the finest community in America, certainly the finest small town in America. And if we embrace that, we can really create something magnificent for ourselves. And then we can serve as an example for other communities. And it can have an effect. It can actually change the world. I believe that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Harvey,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Grady.
Yeah, thank you.
You guys are awesome, superheroes in your own right.
Good. So I'm thinking what I'll do is, why do you think you'd be a better mayor than the two other candidates?
I think, first of all, it's who I am as a person, that I feel like I embrace everyone. It's not where I came from and all of that. So I'm not an insider in any way like that. I also have a very clear, strong vision of what Fairfield can become. And I'm confident that I know how to do that. I know the pieces that are involved. And I can see it. I have the vision for it. I have the vision. I know it can be done. And so it's really just a matter of being able to present that. This reason why I'm running for mayor is that my voice would not be heard otherwise. I just realized that. I have the greatest ideas in the world, but who's going to listen? So I realized that if I became mayor, that I'd have a way to speak my heart and to speak my vision. And so that's why I'm doing it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That wasn't too bad.